A struggling single father helped a woman change her tire, not knowing she was a millionaire. Before anything else, let's see how connected we really are. What's one thing you can see from your window right now? The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Maple Street as David Matthews pushed his daughter Emma's bright red stroller along the cracked sidewalk. At 33, David's weathered hands and tired eyes told the story of a man who'd been fighting life's battles alone for far too long. His worn Levi's jeans and faded blue flannel shirt had seen better days, just like everything else in his world since Sarah walked out 3 years ago. "Daddy, can we get ice cream today?" 6-year-old Emma asked, her bright blue eyes sparkling with hope despite knowing the answer would likely be no again. Her small hands clutched her favorite stuffed rabbit, Mr. Hoppy, whose once white fur had turned gray from countless adventures and bedtime cuddles. David's heart clenched as he checked his worn leather wallet. $12.37 until Friday's paycheck from Peterson's auto shop. The bills were piling up faster than his modest income could handle, and Emma's growing appetite seemed to mock their shrinking grocery budget every day. "Maybe next week, sweetheart," he said softly, hating himself for the disappointment that flickered across her innocent face. "But we can stop by the park and feed the ducks with those crackers we saved from lunch." Emma's face brightened immediately. "Can Mr. Hoppy help feed them too?" "Of course he can, baby girl." As they rounded the corner near Riverside Park, where old oak trees provided shade for tired parents and playground equipment that had seen decades of children's laughter, David heard a woman's frustrated voice cutting through the peaceful afternoon air. "Come on, you stupid thing. Not today." A sleek silver Mercedes-Benz sat tilted at an odd angle near the park entrance, steam rising ominously from under the hood. The car looked completely out of place in this working-class neighborhood, like a diamond dropped in a pile of stones. A young woman in an expensive cream-colored designer dress knelt awkwardly beside the flat rear tire, her perfectly manicured hands now black with grease and dirt. Her auburn hair, which had clearly been styled professionally that morning, now hung in frustrated strands around her flushed face. Emma tugged insistently on David's shirt. "Daddy, that pretty lady looks really sad. Like when I dropped my ice cream last summer." Without hesitation, David approached the stranded motorist. "Excuse me, ma'am. Looks like you could use some help there." The woman looked up, pushing a strand of hair from her face with the back of her wrist to avoid getting more grease on her forehead. She was beautiful, maybe 28 years old, with the kind of polished elegance that spoke of a life David could only imagine. Her green eyes held a mixture of frustration and relief. "Oh, thank goodness. A real person who might actually know what they're doing," she said, her voice carrying a slight tremor of stress. "I have an absolutely crucial meeting in exactly 1 hour downtown, and I have absolutely no idea how to change this infernal thing. I've called 3 roadside assistance companies, but they all said it would be at least 2 hours. I'm David, and this here is Emma," he said, already rolling up his sleeves with the practiced efficiency of a man who'd spent 6 years fixing cars for a living. "Don't you worry one bit. We'll get you back on the road in no time. Emma, can you be my special helper and watch for cars while Daddy works?" Emma nodded seriously, taking her job as official safety supervisor very seriously indeed. As David worked with practiced hands, loosening lug nuts and positioning the jack with the kind of mechanical precision that came from years of experience, Emma chatted animatedly with the woman whose name was Victoria Sterling. Victoria found herself charmed by the little girl's innocent questions and observations about everything from cloud shapes to why grown-ups always seem to be in such a hurry. "Do you have any little girls?" Emma asked with the directness that only 6-year-olds possess. Victoria's smile faltered slightly. "No, sweetie. I don't have any children." "That's okay," Emma said matter-of-factly. "Daddy says some people are meant to take care of different things. Maybe you take care of something else really important." Victoria glanced at David, who was focused intently on his work, and felt something stir in her chest, an unfamiliar warmth she couldn't quite name. 25 minutes later, the Mercedes purring like new, Victoria pressed a crisp $50 bill into David's grease-stained but reluctant hand. "Please, for the little one. You've absolutely saved my entire day." "Ma'am, it really wasn't necessary," David protested, but Victoria's grateful smile was so genuine that he found himself accepting the money. "Just glad we could help." That night, as Emma slept peacefully in her small bed, clutching Mr. Hoppy and dreaming whatever 6-year-olds dream about, David stared at the $50 bill on their tiny kitchen table. It would buy groceries for an entire week, maybe even a small treat for Emma. He had absolutely no idea that his simple act of kindness had just changed everything forever. 3 weeks later, on a dreary Tuesday morning that seemed designed to crush spirits, David's carefully constructed world came crashing down around him like a house of cards in a windstorm. Mr. Peterson, the gruff but fair owner of Peterson's auto shop where David had worked faithfully for 6 years, stood uncomfortably in the doorway of the tiny 2-bedroom apartment David shared with Emma. His weathered face bore the expression of a man delivering news he desperately wished he didn't have to share. "I'm real sorry, David. You've been one of my best mechanics, and you know I think the world of you and little Emma," Peterson said, his voice heavy with genuine regret. "But the corporate office made the decision over my head. They're closing down all the smaller locations and consolidating operations at the big facility downtown. Your last paycheck will cover you through this Friday, and I'll give you the best reference letter you've ever seen, but that's all I can do." After Peterson left, his work boots echoing sadly down the narrow hallway, David sat heavily on their threadbare couch that had come from a garage sale 3 years ago. He buried his face in his hands, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing down on his shoulders like a physical burden. The rent was due in exactly 10 days. $800 he simply didn't have, and no immediate prospect of earning. Emma's kindergarten registration fee was already 2 weeks overdue, and the school had sent a stern reminder notice. The refrigerator hummed mockingly in the background, nearly empty except for a jar of peanut butter, half a loaf of bread, and some wilted lettuce that had seen better days. "Daddy?" Emma's small voice came from behind him as she emerged from her bedroom, dragging her feet in the way children do when they sense something is terribly wrong. She was clutching Mr. Hoppy against her chest and wearing her favorite pajamas, the ones with faded pink unicorns that Sarah had bought her 4th birthday, back when their little family was still intact. "Are you crying? You look like you were crying." David quickly wiped his eyes with the back of his sleeve, forcing what he hoped was a reassuring smile onto his face. "Just tired, baby girl. Daddy's just really tired. But everything's going to be okay. I promise you that." But as he tucked Emma into her small bed that night, reading her favorite story about a brave little rabbit who went on adventures, David wasn't sure how he'd possibly keep that promise. His resume was painfully thin: high school diploma, 6 years at Peterson's auto shop, and 3 years of single parenthood after Sarah left them for her college boyfriend when Emma was barely 3 years old. The memory of that day still stung. Coming home from work to find half their belongings gone and a note on the kitchen table explaining that Sarah needed to find herself and couldn't handle the responsibilities of marriage and motherhood. The next morning brought even more devastating news, delivered in the form of an official-looking letter shoved under their door. David's hands trembled as he read the typed words. "Notice to tenants. Due to rising property values and maintenance costs, rent will increase from $800 to $1,200 and $200 per month, effective beginning next month. This increase is within legal limits under current rent control ordinances. Please confirm your intention to remain at the new rental rate within 10 business days." David read the letter 3 times, hoping somehow the numbers would change. Even if he managed to find another job immediately, how could he possibly afford a 50% increase in their housing costs? His mind raced through possibilities: moving to a cheaper neighborhood, finding a roommate, working 2 jobs. But every option seemed to lead to the same frightening conclusion. "Daddy, I drew you a picture." Emma bounded into the small kitchen with the boundless energy that only 6-year-olds possess, holding up a crayon drawing of a house with 3 stick figures standing in front of it. The artwork was surprisingly detailed for a child her age: him in his work clothes, her with pigtails, and surprisingly, a third figure with long flowing hair. "This is beautiful, sweetheart. Who's that third person there?" "That's the pretty lady from the car, the one with the nice smile. I hope we see her again sometime. She seemed lonely, like she needed friends." David forced a smile, though his heart was breaking into smaller pieces with each passing moment. In less than 2 weeks, they might very well be homeless, living in their old pickup truck or worse. The pretty lady with the expensive Mercedes lived in a completely different universe, one where flat tires were the worst problems you could possibly face. Meanwhile, 30 miles across town in her luxurious penthouse office that occupied the entire 40th floor of Sterling Enterprises Tower, Victoria Sterling stood at floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the sprawling city below. She couldn't shake the memory of the gentle man and his precious daughter, who had helped her without expecting anything in return, who had treated her like a regular person instead of a walking bank account. She had been researching various community outreach programs for the Sterling Foundation, looking for ways to make a meaningful impact beyond writing checks to faceless charities. Perhaps it was time to take a much more personal, hands-on approach to helping people. A decision was slowly forming in her brilliant mind, one that would change 3 lives in ways none of them could possibly imagine. Victoria Sterling's private investigator, James Morrison, was the kind of man who could find out anything about anyone without them ever knowing they were being watched. He laid the thick manila file on her polished mahogany desk with the practiced discretion that came from 20 years of handling sensitive information for wealthy clients who valued their privacy above all else. David Robert Matthews, age 33, born October 15th in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Morrison began in his professional monotone. Recently unemployed automotive mechanic, worked 6 years at Peterson's auto shop until corporate closure last week. Daughter Emma Rose Matthews, age 6, born March 22nd. Wife Sarah Elizabeth Matthews abandoned the family 3 years ago. Divorced finalized 2 years ago. No contact or child support since departure. Victoria studied the surveillance photographs spread across her desk like pieces of a puzzle she was trying to solve. David at the neighborhood grocery store on Elm Street, carefully counting coupons and comparing prices on generic brands. Emma at the small playground behind their apartment building, wearing shoes that were clearly at least 1 size too small, her jeans hemmed with what looked like duct tape, her chest tightened with an emotion she rarely allowed herself to experience. Genuine empathy mixed with something else she couldn't quite identify. Current living situation and financial status? She asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Month-to-month rental agreement on East Elm Street, apartment 2B. Landlord just issued notice of rent increase from $800 to $1,200 monthly, based on his banking records and credit report. Morrison paused, consulting his notes. He's got maybe 2 weeks before eviction proceedings begin. Checking account balance as of yesterday, $143. No savings account, no investments, no family financial support system. That evening, Victoria drove her midnight blue BMW through neighborhoods she'd never had reason to visit before. The contrast was striking and sobering. Chain-link fences instead of manicured hedges, cracked driveways instead of circular brick drives, and houses that had clearly seen better decades instead of the pristine estates she was accustomed to. David's building was a converted duplex with peeling white paint and a broken mailbox held together with electrical tape. Victoria parked across the street, feeling like an intruder in this world of genuine struggle and authentic relationships. Through the thin curtains of their front window, she could see them at their small kitchen table. David was helping Emma with what appeared to be homework, his face patient and attentive despite the obvious stress lines around his tired eyes. A single lamp provided their only illumination, probably an attempt to keep their electricity bill as low as possible. Victoria's childhood had been a series of prestigious boarding schools, private tutors and nannies who were paid to care. Her father, William Sterling, had built a real estate fortune worth hundreds of millions, but he had also built impenetrable walls around his heart after Victoria's mother died when she was 7. She had learned early that money could buy absolutely anything, except the kind of warmth and genuine connection she was witnessing between David and his daughter through that modest window. The next morning, Victoria made a phone call that would have shocked her business associates and board members. "Mrs. Henderson? This is Victoria Sterling from Sterling Enterprises. I understand you manage several rental properties on the east side of town. I'd like to purchase the building at 847 East Elm Street immediately. Today, if the paperwork can be arranged. By noon, she owned David's building through a subsidiary company. By evening, she had developed a comprehensive plan that would test whether kindness could truly be repaid without destroying the very innocence that made it so beautiful and rare. David was reading Emma her favorite bedtime story about the adventures of a brave little mouse when an unexpected knock interrupted their nightly routine. A well-dressed professional woman in her 50s stood at their door, holding an official-looking clipboard and wearing the kind of smile that suggested good news. "Mr. Matthews, my name is Janet Crawford, and I represent Sterling Property Management. We've recently acquired this building, and I'm here to inform you of some changes to your lease agreement." David's heart sank, expecting more bad news about rent increases or eviction notices. "The previous rent increase notice has been canceled completely," Crawford continued, "and we're actually implementing a neighborhood improvement initiative that will reduce your monthly rent to $500. The reduction is effective immediately and guaranteed for the next 2 years. David stared at her in stunned silence, certain he had misheard or was experiencing some kind of stress-induced hallucination. After Crawford left, Emma tugged persistently on his shirt sleeve. "Daddy, why are you crying happy tears? Did something really good happen?" He knelt down, wrapping his arms around his daughter and holding her tight against his chest. Maybe miracles really did happen to people like them after all. But deep in his mechanic's mind, trained to look for problems and connections, a tiny voice whispered that coincidences this convenient rarely happen by accident. 2 days later, another miracle arrived in the form of an unexpected phone call that rang just as David was making Emma's breakfast with the last of their peanut butter. "David Matthews, this is Helen Rodriguez from Rodriguez Construction Company. We heard through the grapevine that you're an experienced mechanic looking for work. We maintain a fleet of about 30 trucks and heavy equipment, and we need someone reliable to keep them running. Would you be interested in discussing a position?" The job paid $2,100 a month, more than David had ever earned in his entire working life. It also included basic health insurance for both him and Emma, something that had kept him awake countless nights worrying about what would happen if either of them got seriously sick or injured. As he hung up the phone, his hands were actually shaking with relief and disbelief. In the span of one remarkable week, he had gone from facing complete homelessness and financial ruin to having more stability and hope than he'd experienced since Sarah walked out on their family. But David Matthews had always been observant and analytical, traits that made him an excellent mechanic and a naturally cautious person. Something about the timing felt almost too perfect to be purely coincidental. That afternoon, while Emma played happily on the swing set at the small neighborhood park, her laughter ringing through the crisp autumn air, David noticed the sleek black sedan parked across the street from the playground. It was the same car he'd glimpsed near the grocery store 3 days ago, and outside Emma's elementary school yesterday morning, when he casually mentioned his recent good fortune with the rent reduction to Mrs. Patterson, his elderly neighbor who had lived in the building for 15 years. She shared something that made his suspicions crystallize into certainty. "That's very strange, dear," she said, adjusting her wire-rimmed glasses. "Sterling Property Management has owned 3 buildings on this block for at least 5 years, but they've never once reduced anyone's rent. In fact, poor old Mr. Chen in Building 843 got evicted just last month when he couldn't manage the increase from $750 to $1,100. Made me so sad to see him loading his furniture into his grandson's pickup truck." David's analytical mechanic mind started connecting dots with the same systematic approach he used to diagnose engine problems. The timeline was too convenient, the sequence of events too perfectly orchestrated, the job offer arriving exactly when he needed it most, the rent reduction coming immediately after the increase notice. Someone with significant resources and influence was systematically fixing his life, and he had a growing suspicion about who that someone might be. That evening, as they shared a simple dinner of grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, a feast by their recent standards, Emma was unusually thoughtful and talkative. "Daddy, I keep thinking about the pretty lady from the car with the flat tire. Do you think she's lonely?" When she smiled at us, her eyes looked sad, like she was pretending to be happy. David studied his daughter's innocent but perceptive face. Emma had always possessed an emotional intelligence that amazed him, a gift she'd inherited from her mother, along with those striking blue eyes and natural empathy. "Why do you think she might be lonely, sweetheart?" She kept looking at us like she wanted to stay and talk longer, like when I watch other kids at school playing with their mommies and daddies together. And I wish I could have that too, but different somehow. That night, after Emma was peacefully asleep, David sat at his second-hand laptop computer, a purchase from the previous year, when their financial situation had been slightly more stable. He typed Victoria Sterling into the search engine, not entirely sure what he expected to find. The results made his blood run cold and his heart rate accelerate. Victoria Sterling, Chief Executive Officer of Sterling Enterprises, net worth estimated at $47 million, renowned philanthropist and art gallery owner, recently featured in Forbes magazine's 30 Under 30 Philanthropists to Watch, daughter of real estate mogul William Sterling. The pretty lady with the broken-down Mercedes wasn't just wealthy, she was one of the richest and most influential people in the entire state. David leaned back in his desk chair, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place with mechanical precision. The private investigator he'd spotted following them, the mysteriously convenient job offer from a construction company that somehow knew he was unemployed, the rent reduction that defied all logic and precedent. Victoria Sterling wasn't simply some grateful motorist he'd helped. She was systematically and methodically reconstructing his entire life from behind the scenes. But the question that kept him awake until dawn was simple and terrifying. What did she want in return for all this orchestrated generosity? The next morning brought Emma's 7th birthday, a milestone David had been dreading financially but determined to make special despite their limitations. He had managed to save enough money over the past 2 months for a small chocolate cake from the neighborhood bakery and a used bicycle he'd discovered at a garage sale, bright pink with colorful streamers attached to the handlebars and a bell that chimed when you pressed the button. As he watched Emma's face completely transform with pure joy, spinning in excited circles around their small living room while still wearing her pajamas, David's heart swelled with the kind of bittersweet happiness that comes from giving everything you have to someone you love more than life itself. "It's the most beautiful, most perfect bicycle in the whole entire world, Daddy," she exclaimed, running her small hands along the frame as if it were made of precious metals instead of second-hand steel. A firm knock at their front door interrupted their private celebration. David opened it to find a professional delivery man in a crisp uniform, struggling to maneuver an enormous wrapped box through their narrow doorway. "David Matthews? Special birthday delivery for Miss Emma Matthews." The return address, printed in elegant gold lettering, read, "Sterling Enterprises." David's jaw tightened as he signed for the package, his suspicions now confirmed beyond any reasonable doubt. Inside the beautifully wrapped box was a complete professional art set that belonged in a high-end specialty store rather than their modest apartment. Premium colored pencils in every conceivable shade, professional-grade watercolors, brushes of various sizes, and a leather-bound sketchbook with Emma's name embossed in gold on the cover. The accompanying card was written in elegant handwriting that matched the sophisticated woman he remembered. "For a budding artist with unlimited potential. Happy birthday, Emma. A friend who believes in you." Emma gasped with the kind of wonder usually reserved for Christmas morning, running her fingers reverently over the pristine art supplies. "Daddy, these are exactly like the ones they display in the fancy art store downtown, behind the glass case." David's protective instincts flared into something resembling controlled anger. Victoria Sterling was crossing clearly established boundaries now. This wasn't simple charity or gratitude. This was calculated manipulation designed to insert herself into their lives. Did she honestly think she could purchase her way into their family with expensive gifts and financial interventions? That afternoon, while Emma took her customary nap, exhausted from birthday excitement, David drove across town to Sterling Enterprises Tower. The building was a monument to wealth and corporate power, 40 floors of glass and chrome reaching toward the sky like a gleaming finger pointing at heaven itself. The receptionist, polished and professional in the way that expensive employees always are, informed him with practiced courtesy that Ms. Sterling was conducting important board meetings all afternoon and would not be available until the following week. "Please tell her that David Matthews is here and needs to speak with her immediately," he said with quiet determination. "She'll understand exactly who I am and why I'm here." 20 minutes later, Victoria Sterling emerged from the executive elevator, looking even more stunning and sophisticated than he remembered. But now David could see past her carefully constructed facade to the calculation and loneliness behind her warm smile. "David, what a wonderful and unexpected surprise. I hope Emma loved her birthday present. I wasn't sure what a 7-year-old might enjoy. We need to talk somewhere private, right now." Victoria's penthouse office was a masterpiece of interior design and conspicuous wealth, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking panoramic view of the city, original artwork that probably cost more than most people's houses, and furniture that David was certain cost more than his entire annual salary. She gestured gracefully to a leather chair positioned across from her imposing mahogany desk. "I know exactly what you've been doing," David said without any preliminary small talk. "The job at Rodriguez Construction, the mysterious rent reduction, the expensive birthday gifts. I want to know why you're doing this, and I want it to stop immediately." Victoria's professional composure never wavered, but David caught a flicker of something vulnerable in her green eyes. "I'm not sure I understand what you're suggesting." "Victoria, I may not have attended college or business school, but I'm definitely not stupid," he replied, his voice steady but firm. "A unemployed mechanic doesn't go from jobless to employed in 24 hours unless someone with influence makes strategic phone calls. Property management companies don't reduce rent out of pure kindness, especially when they're raising it for every other tenant, and wealthy strangers don't send expensive gifts to children they've met exactly once." For a long moment that stretched between them like a bridge neither wanted to cross first, they stared at each other across her pristine desk. Finally, Victoria's carefully maintained mask slipped just enough to reveal the person beneath. "You're absolutely right," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. I have been helping you and Emma. I want to know why. Victoria stood gracefully, walking to the enormous window that framed the city like a living photograph. When she turned back to face him, David saw something raw and desperately vulnerable in her expression that made his anger waver slightly. Because when I watched you with Emma in that parking lot, I witnessed something I've never had in my entire life, and I suppose I wanted to find a way to be part of something that beautiful and real. Victoria's confession hung in the air between them like a fragile bridge that could collapse with the wrong word. David studied her face intently, seeing past the carefully constructed wealthy facade to something much deeper and more painful, a loneliness that all the money in the world couldn't cure or even touch. You can't buy your way into people's lives, Victoria. That's not how genuine relationships work. I'm not trying to buy anything. The words came out sharper and more desperate than she had intended, revealing cracks in her professional composure. Do you have any idea what it's like to have absolutely everything money can provide but still lack the one thing that actually matters? I've had wealth and privilege my entire life, David. I've never had a real family or people who cared about me as a person rather than a bank account. David's expression softened slightly, though his guard remained up. So you decided to play fairy godmother to mine? Victoria laughed, but the sound held no humor whatsoever, only bitter self-recognition. My father taught me from a very young age that every human relationship is fundamentally transactional, that everyone wants something from you eventually. You and Emma were the first people I'd encountered in years who helped me without wanting anything in return, without even knowing who I was or what I could do for you. And now you're systematically making sure that I owe you everything. No! Victoria moved toward him, her professional composure cracking like ice under pressure. I wanted to help because watching Emma hug you in that parking lot, seeing how completely she trusts you, how safe and loved she feels in your presence, I realized that I have never felt that way about another human being, not once in 28 years of living. David saw genuine tears threatening at the corners of her eyes, and despite his anger and suspicion, his natural protective instincts began to override his caution. Victoria, my mother died when I was 7 years old, she continued, her voice becoming smaller and more vulnerable with each word. Breast cancer. My father couldn't handle the grief, so he sent me away to boarding school when I turned 8. I've been emotionally alone my entire life, David, surrounded by employees and business associates and people who want favors, but completely alone when it comes to genuine human connection. Victoria walked back to the window, pressing her palm against the cool glass as if trying to touch the world beyond her isolation. When James, my investigator, told me that you might lose Emma, that you might both end up homeless and living in your truck, I couldn't stand by and do nothing. The thought of that precious little girl sleeping in a car because I had the power to prevent it, but chose not to act. The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken emotions and the weight of revelations that changed everything. Finally, David spoke, his voice quiet but firm. The job at Rodriguez Construction, the rent reduction, I need you to undo all of it immediately. Victoria's face went completely white as if he had physically struck her. David, please, you don't understand what you're asking. Without help, you and Emma will lose everything again within weeks. You'll be back to facing eviction and homelessness. Then that's my choice to make, not yours. Emma and I don't want or need charity, especially charity that comes with strings attached. It's not charity. Victoria's voice broke completely and tears began streaming down her cheeks, ruining her perfect makeup. It's me trying desperately to figure out how to care about other people. I don't know how to do this, David. I don't know how to have genuine friends or be part of a real family. All I know is business transactions and board meetings and charity galas where everyone smiles beautifully, but no one means a single word they say. David stood to leave, but Victoria's next words stopped him before he reached the door. Emma asked me if I was lonely that day in the parking lot. A 6-year-old child saw through me in 5 minutes and recognized something that every adult in my life has missed or chosen to ignore, that I'm completely and utterly alone in this world. David turned back to see Victoria crying openly now, her perfectly applied makeup running in dark streaks down her cheeks, her professional facade completely abandoned. Give me a chance, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Not to fix your life with money or influence, but to learn how to be the kind of person who might actually be worthy of knowing you and Emma. Please, David, teach me how to be part of something real. Outside Victoria's office windows, storm clouds were gathering over the city skyline, and David realized that his simple act of kindness in a parking lot 3 weeks ago had unleashed forces that none of them knew how to control or predict. The real story of their intertwined lives was just beginning, and the stakes were higher than any of them had imagined. David drove home in silence, Victoria's tearful confession echoing in his mind. When he arrived at their apartment, Emma was at the kitchen table carefully drawing with her new art supplies. She looked up with those perceptive blue eyes that seemed to see straight through adult complications. "Daddy, you look sad. Did something bad happen?" David sat beside her, watching as she colored a picture of 3 people holding hands. "Emma, what would you think if we had to give back some presents that someone gave us?" Emma studied her drawing thoughtfully. "Like when Tommy at school had to give back the toy he took from Sarah's desk. Something like that." "Well," Emma said, choosing her words carefully like the wise little soul she was, "if someone gives you something because they want to trick you or make you do something you don't want to do, then you should probably give it back. But if they give it to you because their heart is sad and they just want to be friends, maybe that's different." David stared at his daughter, amazed once again by her intuitive understanding of human nature. "The pretty lady with the car, Victoria. She seemed really lonely, Daddy. When she looked at us, it was like she was hungry, but not for food, for something else." That evening, David made a decision that surprised even himself. He called Victoria's office. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began when she answered. "Emma and I don't want charity, but maybe we could try friendship instead." Victoria's sharp intake of breath was audible through the phone. "What does that mean?" she asked carefully. "It means you stop trying to fix our lives with money. And it means if you want to spend time with us, you ask like a normal person instead of orchestrating elaborate schemes." There was a long pause. "I don't know how to be a normal person, David. I've never learned." "Then maybe it's time you did." 2 days later, Victoria knocked on their door at 6 p.m., holding a grocery bag and looking more nervous than David had ever seen her. She was dressed simply, jeans and a sweater, though David suspected they probably cost more than his monthly salary. "I brought ingredients for dinner," she said hesitantly. "I thought maybe I could cook for you and Emma, if that's okay." Emma's face lit up like Christmas morning. "You can cook? Can you teach me?" As Victoria fumbled her way through making spaghetti and meatballs, clearly out of her element in the small kitchen, David watched her interact with Emma. There was something beautiful and heartbreaking about seeing this powerful businesswoman get flour in her hair, while a 6-year-old patiently explained the proper way to roll meatballs. "Like this, Victoria," Emma demonstrated. "Daddy taught me you have to be gentle but firm." "I think I'm better at the firm part than the gentle part," Victoria admitted, laughing as her meatball fell apart in her hands. For the first time since they'd met, David saw Victoria's mask completely down. She wasn't the polished CEO or the lonely millionaire. She was just a woman trying to learn how to be part of something real. That night after Emma had gone to bed, David and Victoria sat on his small couch talking quietly. "Thank you," Victoria said simply, "for giving me a chance to do this the right way. We're not a charity case, Victoria, and we're not a project for you to fix." "I know," she said, meeting his eyes. "That's what makes this so terrifying. I don't know how to care about people without trying to control the situation." David studied her face in the dim lamplight. "Maybe that's something you can learn too." Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall, and inside their small apartment, 3 very different people began the delicate process of becoming a family. Over the next month, Victoria became a regular presence in their lives, but in a way that felt organic, rather than orchestrated. She would stop by after work with groceries, and they would cook dinner together. She learned to braid Emma's hair for school and helped with homework at their small kitchen table. Slowly, carefully, she was learning to be part of their world without trying to remake it. But David could see the struggle in her eyes. Victoria was used to solving problems with money and influence. Learning to simply be present, to offer comfort instead of solutions, went against every instinct she'd developed in 28 years of wealth and power. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday evening in November. Emma had been quiet all day, and during dinner, she finally spoke up. "There's a daddy-daughter dance at school next week," she said, not looking up from her plate. "But I don't think we should go." "Why not, sweetheart?" David asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. "Because you'll have to buy a dress. And dresses cost money and you'll worry about it all week." David's heart broke a little. His 6-year-old daughter was already learning to limit her dreams based on their financial reality. Victoria, who had been quietly eating her spaghetti, set down her fork. "Emma, would you like to go dress shopping with me this weekend? Just us girls?" Emma's eyes widened. "Really? But Daddy said we can't take money from you anymore." Victoria looked at David, and he saw something in her expression that made him nod slightly. This wouldn't be me giving you money, Victoria said carefully. This would be me asking if I could take my friend Emma shopping, because I've never had a little girl to shop with and it would make me really happy. Emma looked between them, her 6-year-old mind working through the complexities of adult relationships. Would it make you happy, Victoria? Really happy? Really, truly happy, Victoria confirmed. That Saturday, David watched from the doorway as Victoria helped Emma try on dresses at the department store. Victoria's face was radiant with joy as Emma twirled in a blue dress with sparkles on the skirt. It was the first time David had seen Victoria look genuinely, completely happy. "Daddy, look, I'm a princess," Emma called out, spinning until the dress flared around her. "You're the most beautiful princess I've ever seen," David replied, and he meant it. But it was Victoria's expression that caught his attention. She was watching Emma with such pure love and wonder that David felt something shift in his chest. This wasn't about money or control or even loneliness. Victoria genuinely loved his daughter. That night, after Emma had modeled her new dress for Mr. Hoppy and every stuffed animal in her room, she climbed into David's lap on the couch. "Daddy, I think Victoria loves us," she said matter-of-factly. "What makes you say that?" "Because when she looks at us, her eyes get all soft and happy, like how you look at me when you think I'm not watching." David realized his daughter was right. Victoria Sterling, one of the most powerful women in the state, had fallen in love with their little family. The question was, what was he going to do about it? The daddy-daughter dance was magical. Emma glided across the school gymnasium floor in her sparkling blue dress, her hand in David's, her face glowing with pure happiness. Victoria had volunteered to help with decorations, and David spotted her in the corner, hanging streamers and looking more content than he'd ever seen her. Later, as they drove home with a sleepy Emma in the back seat, Victoria riding alongside them in her own car, David made a decision that would change everything. It was time to stop being afraid of what Victoria's presence in their lives might mean, and start thinking about what it could become. December brought the first real test of their fragile new dynamic. Victoria's father, William Sterling, announced he was coming to town for the holidays, something that hadn't happened in 5 years. Victoria's carefully constructed calm began to crack almost immediately. "He wants to meet at the club for dinner," she told David over coffee while Emma was at school. "He says he has concerns about how I've been spending my time lately." David had heard enough about William Sterling to know this wasn't going to be a pleasant family reunion. The man had built his fortune by being ruthless in business, and had apparently applied the same approach to raising his daughter. "Do you want us to stay away while he's here?" David asked, though the thought of abandoning Victoria when she needed support felt wrong. "No," Victoria said quickly, then paused. "Actually, I was wondering, would you consider meeting him? Both of you?" David could see the fear in her eyes. Victoria Sterling, who commanded boardrooms and negotiated million-dollar deals, was terrified of her own father. "If that's what you want, then yes." The dinner was held at the exclusive Riverside Country Club, where David felt completely out of place in his best shirt and tie. William Sterling was exactly what David had expected. Tall, imposing, with silver hair and cold blue eyes that seemed to calculate the monetary value of everything they looked at. "So you're the mechanic," William said, shaking David's hand with just enough pressure to establish dominance. "And this must be the child Victoria has become so fond of." Emma, wearing her best dress and holding Mr. Hoppy, because Victoria had insisted he should come too, looked up at William with her usual directness. "Are you Victoria's daddy?" she asked. "I am. She talks about you sometimes. She gets sad when she does." The silence that followed was deafening. William Sterling looked like he'd been slapped, while Victoria's face went pale. Throughout dinner, David watched William systematically try to undermine Victoria's confidence. Every decision she'd made, every aspect of her business, every choice in her personal life was subtly criticized or questioned. But something had changed in Victoria over the past few months. Instead of shrinking under her father's disapproval, she sat straighter. When William suggested she was wasting time on charity cases, Victoria's voice was steady and firm. "David and Emma aren't charity cases, Father. They're my family." The word hung in the air like a declaration of war. William's eyes narrowed. "Family. Victoria, you can't seriously believe that this arrangement is sustainable. What happens when the novelty wears off, when you realize you're playing house with people who have nothing to offer you?" David started to stand, but Victoria's hand on his arm stopped him. "With respect, Father, you're wrong. David and Emma have given me something I never had growing up. Unconditional love. They care about me as a person, not as a bank account or a business asset. And when they need money for the child's college, when there's a medical emergency, when reality sets in, they'll take everything you give them and then disappear when someone better comes along. Mark my words. Emma, who had been quietly coloring on her placemat, looked up suddenly. That's not true, she said in her clear 6-year-old voice. We loved Victoria before we even knew she had money. We love her because she makes really good spaghetti and she braids my hair and she reads stories with different voices for all the characters. She paused, then added with devastating simplicity, Don't you love Victoria just because she's Victoria? William Sterling had no answer for that question. After dinner, as they walked to their cars, Victoria was quiet. Finally, she spoke. I need to ask you something, David, and I need you to be completely honest. David waited. Are you and Emma with me because of what I can provide? The security, the opportunities, the lifestyle? David stopped walking and turned to face her. In the light from the parking lot lamps, he could see the vulnerability in her eyes, the fear that her father's words might be true. Victoria, do you remember what Emma drew the day after we met you? 3 people holding hands in front of a house? Victoria nodded. She drew that before she knew you had money, before any of the help with rent or jobs or anything else. She drew it because even at 6 years old she recognized something good in you, something worth keeping. He reached out and took her hand. We're not here for your money, Victoria. We're here because somewhere along the way you stopped being the woman who helped us with a flat tire and became the woman we can't imagine living without. Victoria's eyes filled with tears, but for the first time since David had known her, they were tears of happiness rather than loneliness. Behind them, Emma was already planning their Christmas celebration, chattering about cookies and decorations and making sure Victoria knew she was invited to everything. The healing had begun. Christmas morning brought a surprise that none of them had expected. Victoria arrived at their apartment at 7 a.m., looking nervous and carrying a small wrapped box that clearly wasn't meant for Emma. I have something I need to give you, she said to David. But first, there's something I need to tell you both. They gathered in the living room, Emma still in her pajamas and clutching Mr. Hoppy surrounded by the modest pile of presents they'd placed under their small artificial tree. I've made a decision about my father and the family business, Victoria began, her voice steady but her hands shaking slightly. I'm stepping back from Sterling Enterprises. Not completely, but I'm delegating most of the day-to-day operations so I can focus on what actually matters to me. David felt his stomach drop. Victoria, you don't need to change your entire life for us. I'm not doing it for you, she said, smiling. I'm doing it for me. For the first time in my adult life, I know what I want. I want to wake up in the morning looking forward to the day instead of dreading it. I want to help Emma with her homework and teach her how to paint with watercolors. I want to cook dinner with you and argue about whether the meatballs are too big or too small. She paused, taking a deep breath. I want to build something real instead of just managing something profitable. Emma, who had been listening with the serious expression she wore when adults were discussing important things, suddenly brightened. Does that mean you'll have more time for tea parties? All the tea parties you want, Victoria promised, laughing. Then she turned to David and held out the small wrap box. This is for you. But before you open it, I need you to know that I'm not trying to buy anything or fix anything. I'm just trying to say something I don't have words for. David opened the box carefully. Inside was a simple silver locket on a chain. When he opened it, he found a tiny photograph, the 3 of them at Emma's school carnival the week before, laughing as Emma tried to win a goldfish at the ring toss game. When did you take this? I didn't. Mrs. Rodriguez from your school took it and gave me a copy. She said it was the happiest she'd ever seen any of you look. David stared at the photograph. They did look happy. Genuinely, completely happy, in a way he'd forgotten was possible. Victoria, he said quietly, I need to tell you something too. He set the locket down carefully and took her hands in his. I love you. Not because you've helped us, not because you've made our lives easier, but because you've made our lives fuller. You've made us a family. Emma clapped her hands together. Does this mean Victoria is going to be my mom now? David and Victoria looked at each other, both realizing that a 6-year-old had just asked the question they'd been dancing around for weeks. Would you like that, sweetheart? Victoria asked carefully. I would like that very, very much, Emma said solemnly. But only if you want to be my mom too. Being a mom is really important work. Victoria's eyes filled with tears as she knelt down to Emma's level. I would be honored to be your mom, Emma, if that's okay with your daddy. David pulled them both into his arms, his own eyes wet with tears he wasn't ashamed to shed. It's more than okay. It's perfect. Later that morning, as they cooked breakfast together and Emma chattered about all the things she wanted to show Victoria how to do, you have to learn how to make pancakes shaped like butterflies, and how to build the best blanket forts, and how to tell when Mr. Hoppy is sad and needs extra hugs. David realized that his simple act of kindness in a parking lot had led to something he'd never dared to hope for. They were going to be a real family. But first, Victoria had one more surprise that would change everything they thought they knew about their future together. 3 months later, on a warm spring afternoon that felt like a new beginning, Victoria stood in their small living room with papers in her hand and an expression that was both nervous and excited. "I have a proposal for you both," she began, "but it's a big one, and I need you to promise to hear me out completely before you decide." David and Emma, who had been building a puzzle at the coffee table, looked up expectantly. "I want to buy us a house. Together. Not as me buying you a house, but as us choosing a home where we can build our life as a family." David opened his mouth to protest, but Victoria held up her hand. "Let me finish. I've been thinking about this for weeks, and I've talked to lawyers and financial advisors to make sure we do this right. I want to put the house in all our names. Yours, mine, and Emma's. Equal ownership. If anything happens to our relationship, if you decide you want me out of your lives, you keep the house. It would be truly yours." Emma looked confused. "Why would we want you out of our lives?" Victoria smiled, kneeling down to Emma's level. "We wouldn't want that, sweetheart. But sometimes adults need to make sure that everyone feels safe and secure before they make big decisions." David was quiet for a long moment, processing what Victoria was offering. It wasn't charity. It was partnership. It wasn't her trying to fix their lives. It was her trying to build a new life with them. "There's something else," Victoria continued. "I want to adopt Emma. Legally. Officially. With your permission, David. I want to be her mother in every way that matters." Emma's face lit up like the sun coming out from behind clouds. "Really? Really truly?" "Really truly," Victoria confirmed. "If you want me to be." Emma launched herself into Victoria's arms. "Yes, yes, yes, yes. Can I call you Mom?" "I would love that more than anything in the world," Victoria said, her voice thick with emotion. David watched the two most important people in his life hold each other, and felt something settle in his chest that he'd been carrying for years without realizing it. The fear that he wasn't enough, that he couldn't provide everything Emma needed, that their small family was somehow incomplete. Victoria had never tried to replace him as Emma's father. Instead, she'd completed their family in a way he'd never known they needed. "Yes," he said simply. "Yes to the house. Yes to the adoption. Yes to all of it." That evening, they drove through neighborhoods looking at houses online had flagged as possibilities. Emma provided running commentary from the back seat about which houses looked friendly and which ones looked stuck up. "That one looks like it has good hiding spots for hide and seek," she declared about a 2-story colonial with a wraparound porch. "And that one looks like it has room for a really big garden where we could grow vegetables," Victoria added, pointing to a house with a large backyard. David found himself imagining their lives in these spaces. Victoria teaching Emma to paint in a sunny kitchen, family movie nights in a living room big enough for a comfortable couch, Emma running through a backyard while they watched from a deck they'd built together. "There's one more thing I need to tell you both," Victoria said as they pulled into the driveway of a house that had somehow felt right the moment they saw it. "My father called yesterday. He wants to have dinner again." David felt his protective instincts flare, but Victoria continued quickly. "I told him that was fine, but this time we'd be hosting. At our new house once we find one. And I told him that if he wants to be part of my life, he needs to accept that you and Emma are part of my life too." "What did he say?" David asked. Victoria smiled. "He said he'd think about it, which for my father is actually progress." As they walked through the house they'd all fallen in love with, Emma claiming bedrooms and planning where her art supplies would go, Victoria measuring windows for curtains, David imagining the life they could build within these walls. David realized that the scared, desperate man who'd helped a stranger with a flat tire 6 months ago was gone. In his place was a man who was building something beautiful with the two people he loved most in the world. Tomorrow, they would make an offer on the house. Next month, Victoria's adoption of Emma would be finalized. And somehow, despite all the odds against them, they were going to be okay. More than okay. They were going to be happy. 1 year later, David stood in the kitchen of their new home, watching through the window as Victoria and Emma worked together in the garden they'd planted in the spring. Emma, now 7.5, was carefully watering the tomato plants while Victoria showed her how to check for pests. Both of them had dirt under their fingernails and matching smiles on their faces. The house had become everything they'd dreamed it could be. Emma's artwork covered the refrigerator and hallway walls. Victoria's business had evolved into something that allowed her to work from home 3 days a week. David had started his own small auto repair shop in their garage, serving their neighbors and building a reputation based on honest work and fair prices. Mr. Hoppy now had a place of honor on Emma's new bed, in a room painted lavender with white clouds that Victoria had spent 2 weekends helping her create. The adoption papers had been finalized 6 months ago. Victoria Sterling was now legally, officially, permanently Emma's mother. The day the judge signed the final decree, Emma had looked up at them both and said, "Does this mean we're a real family now?" "We were always a real family," Victoria had replied. "Now we're just a legal one too." William Sterling had indeed come to dinner at their new house. It had been awkward and tense, but he'd made an effort. When Emma had shown him her art room and explained how Victoria was teaching her about color theory and perspective, something in his expression had softened slightly. "She's a remarkable child," he'd told David later, while Victoria and Emma were in the kitchen making dessert. "She is," David had agreed. "And she has a remarkable mother now, too." William had nodded slowly. "Victoria seems different, happier. Love does that to people." That evening, as they tucked Emma into bed, she looked up at them both with those perceptive blue eyes that still saw straight through to the heart of things. "Daddy, do you remember when you helped Victoria with her car?" "Of course I do, sweetheart. Do you think she really needed help? Or do you think maybe she needed help with something else?" David and Victoria exchanged a look over Emma's head. Leave it to their daughter to see what they'd all missed. "I think," Victoria said carefully, "that sometimes when we think we need one kind of help, we actually need something completely different. Like how when I'm sad about missing my old mom, I think I need to be alone, but what I really need is hugs." "Exactly like that," David confirmed. After Emma was asleep, David and Victoria sat on their back porch, watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. Victoria's head was resting on David's shoulder, and he could feel her contentment in the way she breathed, slow and peaceful. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't stopped to help me that day?" she asked quietly. "No," David said without hesitation. "Because I would have stopped. That's who I am. That's who my parents raised me to be. And it's who I want Emma to be too. And I would have needed help because I'd never learned to change a tire or ask for assistance or trust strangers or any of the things that normal people know how to do." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, then Victoria spoke again. "I used to think that love was about finding someone who needed what you could provide, someone whose problems you could solve. And now I think love is about finding someone who sees who you really are and chooses to build something beautiful with that person." David tightened his arms around her. "I love who you really are, Victoria Sterling." "I love who you really are too, David Matthews." From inside the house, they could hear Emma talking quietly to Mr. Hoppy, telling him about their plans for tomorrow. A trip to the farmer's market, followed by lunch at the park, followed by a family movie night. Their life wasn't perfect. They still worried about money sometimes, still disagreed about parenting decisions, still struggled with the normal challenges that every family faces. Victoria still had moments where her old instincts kicked in, and she tried to solve problems with money instead of presents. David still sometimes felt intimidated by her world of wealth and influence. But they were building something real together, a family based on choice rather than chance, on love rather than obligation, on the radical idea that 3 people from completely different worlds could create something beautiful if they were willing to be vulnerable and honest and brave. Outside their window, Emma's nightlight cast gentle shadows on the walls of the home they'd chosen together. In the morning they would wake up and continue building their life, one ordinary, extraordinary day at a time. And it all started with a simple act of kindness on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, when a man chose to help a stranger and discovered that sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as flat tires and unexpected second chances. Their story was just beginning.